So, in this video, I'm going to be showing you how I made this shot in Blender. It's a little bit complicated, but I'm going to be taking you through my workflow and how I put together the different pieces to make this shot. You can split this into 4 different parts. The first one is just the ship with the reflections and the lighting on it. And then we have this warp asset, the stars asset, and also this planet coming in asset. This was actually my third attempt. I had some different ideas about what the shot would be. The first one was the X-Wing flying through these different rocks and shooting down a TIE fighter, but it ended up looking a little bit strange. I can show you how that kind of turned out here. And then my second attempt was a much more straightforward shot where the X-Wing was fighting a TIE fighter and just it explodes and it's a lot of camera shake. But I wasn't too happy with that one either. So what I eventually settled on was this coming out of warp concept. A much simpler concept in terms of the amount of things that are going on, but I think it ended up having a much more cinematic feel. Full disclosure, I did not make everything used in this shot. The model is from Video Copilot from their star pack, and the planet texture is just one I found on Google Images. Everything used in this video can be found in the description. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing that I did was I imported the X-Wing model and I separated it out by its different materials. I also wanted the wings on the X-Wing to open towards the end of the shot, so I made sure to separate those out into separate models as well. Once I had everything in different pieces, I could start applying the materials, which was a very straightforward process of just connecting up the different textures to their corresponding inputs. I did take some extra time with the window, making sure to add some variation to the roughness to make it look a little bit dirty. And that's about it for the X-Wing. It was very straightforward considering we were using a pre-built asset, but it's just making sure that we're taking that little bit of time to connect everything up properly and adding in little bits of realism here and there. The next thing I wanted to create is the warp drive effect. Now, first thing that I did to do this was actually go online and look at some reference from the movies, because I know that this effect has changed over the years. I was going for a much more modern version of the effect, something you may have seen in the sequel films. The first thing I created was a cylinder, made it a bit bigger, and then stretched it out across the scene. I then jumped into the shading menu and added a noise texture to the cylinder. Then, with a mapping node, I was able to mess with the translation and the rotation of the texture. Then, using my color ramp node, I was able to go in and add in different colors to this noise texture. This went a long way to creating the effect I wanted. Then, with just a few simple keyframes, I was able to complete this effect. I found it looked best when I used the mapping to animate the forward and back, and I used the cylinder to animate the rotation. And that's about it for the warp effect. For the stars right at the end of the warp, I was heavily inspired by Ducky 3D's tutorial on how to do that Star Wars transition. All I did was use the same cylinder that I used for my warp, except this time I created a sphere with an emission material. I stretched it out and then I used that as a particle on a particle system along the side of the cylinder. I then took my camera and animated the FOV to create a more dramatic effect. I then animated the emission material on the sphere in order to make it dissipate towards the end. And now finally, the planet. The planet is made up of 3 spheres. The first one is the planet itself. Then there is a slightly outer sphere, which is the clouds. And then there is an even bigger one, which is the atmosphere. For the planet texture, I'm just using this one I found on Google Images. Thank you to whoever made that. And for the clouds, I am using some that were produced by NASA. I just used the image itself as its alpha channel to get the transparency. The atmosphere was giving me a good deal of grief, but I did find this fantastic atmosphere shader, which you can download for free actually online. The link for that will be in the description. For the lighting, it's very, very simple. It's just a single sunlight with a slightly higher intensity. Once I was happy with the different components I'd made, I went back into my X-Wing scene and created a camera, adding a few simple keyframes in order to get some different camera moves. Once I was happy with the camera, I took the X-Wing and animated the wings just as it comes out of warp. I then imported my warp cylinder so I could get the correct reflections for the start of the video, but I made sure just when my ship comes out of warp to animate it away from frame. I then add a sunlight so I can have the lighting change just as the ship comes out of warp. I made sure to animate the intensity of that sun so it does not begin until after the warp is completed. I then took the camera from the ship scene and copied it into both of my warp scenes so the camera movement is the same. The only one I didn't do this to was the planet, because the planet is so far away that any sort of parallax won't be visible. So all I did for the planet was just frame it up into the camera and then animate it going from small to large. And there you have it. That's all 4 assets completed, and now what we're going to do is render them out and then put them together into a compositing program to make it all look like it was all supposed to be together in the first place. Now, if you don't know what compositing is, it is the last part of the process in visual effects. It's when someone takes all of the elements and puts them all together. Now, if you don't do compositing presently on your renders, I would strongly encourage you to. I'll show you a difference between this render with 0 compositing and with the final compositing done on it. It does make a huge difference. The software I use for compositing is Nuke, but you can get very similar results with Fusion and After Effects. It's up to you. It's all about your creativity and how you use the different layers that you've made to finish the shot. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this gave you an insight into my workflow and how I create shots like these. If you do like this content, please subscribe. I'll be uploading every week. Other than that, I'll see you next time.